3 decades on this bench, looking down at people from every walk of life, and I genuinely believed I had a reliable understanding of human nature. I thought I knew what a person would do when no one was watching, particularly when that person had nothing left and desperation had become their daily companion. That morning proved me completely wrong. A boy walked through those heavy courtroom doors, not holding a parent's hand, not accompanied by any guardian. He came in alongside a police officer, wearing a jacket 3 sizes beyond his frame and sneakers wrapped carefully in gray duct tape. He could not have been older than 10 years old. What he was carrying, and what followed permanently, altered the way I see this world. I have spent 30 years presiding over cases involving millions of dollars and some of the most complex legal battles this city has produced, and yet I sat behind that bench and felt something rise in my throat that I was not prepared for. What this child did and what the wallet's owner chose to do in response is something I carry with me every single day. Let me tell you something about the courtroom I have occupied for 30 years, because it matters to understanding what happened. I have served as a judge in this city through administrations, through economic booms and collapses, through cases that made headlines and cases that never made anything at all. Each morning, I walk through those oak doors carrying one conviction that has never weakened. Character has absolutely nothing to do with the balance in your bank account. Rich or poor, young or old, the neighborhood that shaped you does not determine the person you choose to be. My grandfather arrived in this country carrying nothing except a cardboard suitcase and the kind of physical strength that comes from having no alternative. He worked the waterfront docks, hauling crates through weather that most people only experience through windows. He used to tell me that honesty was the only currency that never loses its value. I never let go of those words. I watched him struggle to keep electricity running in that house, but he never reached for a single coin that did not belong to him. Watching him was my first education in what genuine dignity actually looks like. Early in my career, I trained myself to look at the complete human being standing before me, to ask what this person's actual life looks like and what series of events brought them through my doors on any given morning. That habit has never left me. That Tuesday in November was bitterly cold in the specific way that particular city has of making winter feel personal. The kind of cold that reaches through layers of clothing and convinces you the warmth you remember was imagined. The docket was full of standard matters, property disagreements, minor violations, the predictable machinery of municipal law. Then the doors opened and Leo walked in. He had been sleeping in a subway station for 3 weeks. His hands were trembling from the cold and from fear. Held in those small shaking hands was a thick designer leather wallet containing exactly $10,000 in crisp $100 bills. Ask yourself something honestly. If you had not eaten a warm meal in 3 days, if you were sleeping on concrete, if you found $10,000 in cash on a freezing sidewalk, what would you do? About an hour into the morning session, my clerk called the matter forward. This was not a criminal trial for the boy. The police had brought Leo in because the wallet's owner had filed a frantic report claiming he had been robbed. When officers located Leo near the transit station with the wallet still in his possession, unopened and untouched, they brought him directly to my courtroom to establish the truth on the official record. I looked out at the gallery, and that was when I saw the owner for the first time. His name was Richard Sterling, a prominent local real estate developer. He crossed the floor toward the front of my courtroom, the way certain people move through spaces they believe exist for their convenience, wearing a custom-tailored suit that had probably cost more than my first car. His phone was in his hand, his attention on whatever was streaming across the screen, barely acknowledging the shivering child standing just a few feet from him. I reviewed the police report. Officer Miller, a dependable officer I had known across many years, stood beside Leo and testified that they had found the boy sitting beneath a street lamp in the freezing rain. He had not spent a single dollar, not one. He had not purchased so much as a piece of bread, and I could watch his shoulders shake through that oversized jacket from where I sat. He had simply been waiting for a patrol car to pass so he could hand the wallet directly to law enforcement. I looked down from my bench at Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "this child located your wallet on a public street and waited in freezing conditions to ensure it was returned safely to the authorities. Do you have anything you would like to say to him? What this man chose to do next was something I will not forget. He did not express any gratitude. He did not look at the boy's face. He stepped forward, removed the leather wallet from the clerk's table, and immediately began counting the $100 bills, licking his thumb between each one, narrowing his eyes at the cash as though he fully expected this starving 10-year-old to have helped himself to some portion of it. I allowed the silence to stand. Silence is among the most powerful instruments available on this bench, and I have had 30 years to understand precisely when to use it. I watched him count every last bill, and I kept my expression completely still. I have had considerable practice at that. Inside, I was something else entirely. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about what dignity actually means in practice. It does not live in a silk tie or a thick wallet. It was standing directly in front of that man in duct tape shoes. When Sterling finally finished his count, he snapped the wallet shut. "It is all here," he said, and his tone carried the specific disappointment of someone who had been hoping to find a discrepancy. I removed my glasses. I leaned forward over the bench and looked directly into his eyes. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "a 10-year-old boy without a roof over his head just returned $10,000 in cash to you. Do you have anything at all that you would like to say to him?" What he said next produced an audible reaction from every person in that room. Richard Sterling looked at Leo for the very first time, actually looked at him, but what occupied his eyes was not gratitude. It was cold calculation and the particular hardness that grows in people who have never been told no by anyone who mattered. He reached into the wallet, pinched a single $20 bill between his manicured fingers, and he did not place it in the child's hand. He tossed it onto the wooden table between them. It floated down like something discarded. "Here," Sterling said, his voice carrying the specific weight of condescension that wealthy people sometimes mistake for generosity. "Go and buy yourself a hot meal. And you are fortunate that I am in a hurry today. Otherwise, I would have this officer check your pockets to confirm nothing else has gone missing." A sound moved through my courtroom. My clerk, who has sat beside me through decades of cases and absorbed nearly everything this room can produce, dropped her pen. I have had hardened criminals stand before this bench with more grace than this millionaire displayed in that single moment. I looked at that $20 bill resting on the table. Then I looked at Leo. Let me tell you what he did. He did not reach for it. His stomach was almost certainly aching. His feet were soaking through those damp shoes. But he did not look at the money. He kept his eyes on mine, pulling himself as straight as a shivering 10-year-old frame can manage. There was more honor in those taped sneakers than in everything that man was wearing. I brought my gavel down once with enough force that it rang across the ceiling. "Mr. Sterling," I said, and my voice was very quiet, "pick up your $20. Pick it up right now and go and sit in the front row of the gallery. You are not going to speak. You are not going to look at your phone. This court is not dismissed, and I am nowhere near finished with you." He blinked. It was obvious that people did not often tell him what to do and mean it. He began to say something, but he saw my face, and 30 years on this bench gives you an expression that does not invite discussion. He retrieved his bill and sat down, carrying his fury with him in silence. I redirected my full attention to the boy. I softened everything in my voice. "Leo," I said, "come a little closer to the bench, son." He shuffled forward, pulling that oversized jacket tighter around himself. I leaned down and asked him the question that had been sitting with me since the moment he walked through those doors. "Leo, why did you not keep it?" Nobody would have known. You could have found a warm room, new shoes, food for months. What made you stand in the freezing rain to give it back? What this child said to me next broke something open inside me and then put it back together differently. Leo looked up at my bench. His cheeks were hollowed out and his lips had cracked from the winter wind. He did not hesitate. He did not need to search for his answer because it had been living inside him all along. My mom got very sick last year, Your Honor. Before she passed away, she held my hand and told me something I promised I would carry with me always. His voice was small, but it moved across that completely silent courtroom the way truth moves when there is nothing in the room to stop it. She said, "Leo, we might not always have a warm bed, and our stomachs might be empty sometimes, but we have our name. And the moment you take something that does not belong to you, you lose the only thing you truly own." I had to stop. I simply had to stop and let those words find where they needed to land. I removed my glasses and pressed my fingers against my eyes. Anyone who observes this courtroom regularly knows that gesture and what it means. I looked at this 10-year-old boy swallowed up in a jacket designed for a grown man, and I saw something that no bank account could manufacture. The gallery was perfectly still. Attorneys who argue hard and bitter cases every day of their professional lives were quietly wiping their eyes. But the story had not finished. While every eye in that room was on Leo, Officer Miller stepped up to my bench and leaned close. His expression had shifted into something deliberate and serious. "Your Honor," he said quietly, and passed me a small, clear evidence bag. When we inventoried the wallet at the precinct to establish identification and document the cash, we found something else. It was tucked inside a hidden zipper compartment. Mr. Sterling became extremely agitated when I explained it would need to be logged as evidence before being released. He practically threatened my badge over it. I looked down at the clear plastic bag. Inside was a small black flash drive and a folded piece of heavy parchment paper covered in handwritten numbers. I glanced across at Richard Sterling in the front row. The arrogance had evaporated from his face entirely. The color had gone. His hands were gripping the bench in front of him, and he was not looking at his $10,000 anymore. He was staring at that small evidence bag with the expression of a man watching something he had buried come back up through the ground. And that was when I understood. This man had not been in a hurry because he wanted his money returned. He had been in a controlled panic because a homeless 10-year-old boy had accidentally carried something into a courtroom that had the capacity to bring an entire empire to the ground. I looked at the folded parchment inside the bag. It was a ledger, a handwritten record of payoffs, kickbacks, and shell company transactions, names of city officials, zoning board members, and building inspectors. Millions of dollars moved illegally to push through luxury real estate developments while safety requirements were quietly ignored. The flash drive, I could only assume, held the digital record of every transaction the paper documented. Sterling lunged forward. His voice had lost its practiced composure entirely. "That boy took that from me," he said. "He tampered with it. He is a thief, and I want him arrested immediately." I looked from this man back down to Leo, who was clutching the sides of his jacket, looking confused and genuinely frightened. A child who had refused to spend a single dollar of $10,000 to feed himself over 3 freezing days was now being accused of theft by a man who had stolen millions from an entire city. I looked at Richard Sterling, and I did not raise my voice. Righteous anger does not need volume to be felt. "Mr. Sterling," I said, 10 minutes ago, you stood precisely where you are standing now, licked your thumb, and counted $10,000 in front of a starving child. You looked at me directly and told me it was all there. But the moment this court discovers a ledger documenting your own criminal conduct, this 10-year-old suddenly becomes a master thief capable of tampering with hidden compartments. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He scanned the gallery looking for someone he recognized, someone he had money in. There was no one looking back at him with anything he could use. Officer Miller had already quietly radioed his captain. A man in a dark coat had entered through the double doors at the back of the room, moving with the particular stillness of someone who knows exactly what they are about to do. He approached the front, produced a gold badge for the bailiff, and identified himself as an investigator with the State Anti-Corruption Task Force. His unit had been building a case against Sterling's real estate operation for over a year. The one piece they had been unable to locate was the master ledger, the physical paper trail connecting the payments to the names. And here it was, delivered into a courtroom by a boy who had no warm place to sleep. I watched the investigator approach Sterling. I watched handcuffs close around wrists that carried an expensive watch. I watched that designer leather wallet sit completely abandoned on the defense table. I looked back down at Leo. He was trembling, tears building in his eyes, terrified that he had somehow caused this and would be blamed for it. "Leo," I said, making my voice as gentle as I had ever made it in this room. "Look at me, son." He pressed the dirty, frayed sleeve of his jacket against his eyes and looked up at my bench. "You are not in trouble," I told him, ensuring every person in that room heard every word. "You just did something braver and more honest than most adults accomplish across their entire lives. That man attempted to make you feel small with a $20 bill, but you, Leo, just brought down a giant." After they led Sterling out, the room held a particular quality of quiet that only follows something truly significant. I sat for a moment and let it settle around me. Then I did something I almost never do. I stepped down from the bench. I walked across the floor of my courtroom to where Leo was standing in those duct-tape shoes, and I knelt down until I was completely level with him. His teeth were still chattering from the cold and the damp that had soaked through everything he owned. I placed my hand on his shoulder and told him that the law had just taken care of that man, and now we were going to take care of him. Christina, my clerk, was already on her phone with State Family Services, coordinating an emergency placement, tears running down her face as she spoke. Officer Miller removed his own heavy department fleece jacket and draped it across Leo's shaking shoulders. The jacket completely swallowed him, but for the first time since he had walked into that room, he stopped shivering. Then something began to happen in that gallery that I did not direct and did not need to. A defense attorney in the second row, a man who bills at $1,000 an hour and argues some of the hardest cases in this building, walked quietly to the clerk's desk and placed a $100 bill on the table. A young public defender stepped forward and added a 20. A woman who had only been in the building for a traffic citation reached into her bag and handed Leo a new pair of wool gloves. Within 5 minutes, there was a pile of money on that table for a hot meal and warm clothing. That is what happens when one person makes the honest choice. It produces something that moves outward through a room and reminds everyone present what they are actually capable of. Leo's mother had left him with no money, no property, and no roof over his head. She left him sleeping on a subway platform. But she had also left him with a single lesson about honesty. And that lesson was powerful enough on its own to wake up an entire room full of people who believed they had seen everything. 1 year later, Richard Sterling's real estate empire had collapsed completely. The evidence from the flash drive and the handwritten ledger brought corrupt city officials to trial. Millions in stolen public funds were recovered and returned. Sterling received a 15-year federal sentence. He once had more money than most people can imagine. In the end, he lost the only things that cannot be purchased back. But that is not the part of the story that still reaches me. A few months ago, the heavy wooden doors of my courtroom opened once more. Officer Miller came through, but not in uniform. He was in plain clothes, his wife beside him. Walking alongside them, standing tall with the confident, quiet smile of a child who finally knows where home is, was Leo. He was not wearing an oversized, dirty jacket. He was not wearing duct-tape shoes. His eyes carried the deep, settled peace of someone who has stopped waiting to be told they have to leave. Officer Miller and his wife had formally adopted him. The attorneys and clerks and ordinary people who had been present in that courtroom on that November morning had pooled what they had to establish a trust fund for Leo's education. Leo walked directly up to my bench with a grin that had nothing cautious in it and handed me a small handmade piece of paper. Written inside in the careful, slightly uneven letters of a 10-year-old boy learning to trust the world again, it said this: "Thank you for believing me, Judge. My mom in heaven is really proud." I placed that card on my desk next to the photograph of my grandfather. It reminds me every morning of something I need to be reminded of. Money can purchase custom suits and access and the appearance of power. It cannot purchase character. It cannot acquire the legacy that a struggling mother left for her son in the only lesson she had time to give him. Honesty is not a luxury available only to people with options. It is the thing that remains when every option has been taken away. Leo did not simply return $10,000 that morning. He returned something this room had needed to feel again. He reminded every person in it what we are all still capable of being.